Hey guys, how's it going? Right? Tuesday night. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's good to be back here, all 6 months later. This journey for me started 3 years ago, when I heard a Radiolab piece on Gary Hart. I was 10 years old when this happened, so I think I was more interested in where the Back to the Future trilogy was headed than American politics. I knew the names, but I really didn't know the details of the story. And when I heard this Radiolab piece, I just couldn't believe that there was a moment in our recent history when the presumed next president of the United States wound up in his alleyway in the middle of the night behind his townhouse with 3 journalists, and no one knew what to do, because no one had ever been in their shoes before. And less than a week later, he left politics forever. And when I heard this story, I just thought, this is a thriller, right? Like it was like a Western standoff in the midst of a film noir. And the more I told the story to people I knew, I found it had echoed all these questions that we're talking about in 2018. All these questions about gender politics, all these questions about the relationship between journalists and candidates, and the line between our public life and our private life. And I went to work on a script with 2 other guys, a unique script in that it was co-written by Matt Bai, who's a New York Times Magazine journalist, covered 5 different presidencies, the guy named Jay Carson, who was a political operative, was the press secretary for Hillary Clinton in 2008, he's the press secretary for Howard Dean, for senators that are in Congress today. And so we tried to write a script, not a biopic about Gary Hart, but rather a movie from 20 different points of view. The campaign people, the journalists, the family members, written by a political operative and a political journalist. You know, have you guys seen the movie of the Candidate, the Michael Ritchie film? Right? I love movie fans. That was our North Star. We wanted to make a movie that was hyper real, with just 3 conversations happening at once at all times, that is constantly asking you, the audience, what is relevant, what is important, versus what is just simply entertaining. And at the center of those 20 characters is Hugh Jackman, the most attractive Australian ever born. And look, he's an actor whose heart, she said, very true. Yeah, you're right. That's a fact. He's an actor whose heart just beats out his chest. Whether he's P.T. Barnum or in Les Mis or Wolverine, he's a guy who's so emotionally expressive, he just kind of reaches out from the screen and kind of grabs you by the spine. But in this movie, he does something completely different. Something that he's never done before. He plays an enigma. He plays a person we desperately want to understand. And he brings us within an inch of that, but never lets us in. It's a movie with no heroes, no villains, just people trying to do the right thing as the world is shifting under their feet. Right. I'll be back after. Hope you guys are too. Enjoy the movie. Thanks for coming.
Did you enjoy that? That's the cheap part.
They have to be nice. I'm sitting here. I mean, did you not enjoy that?
So this film's a little different from some of your others in that it's based on fact, history. How was the process in approaching something like that? You had to decide how true you wanted to be in terms of what you were showing versus where you were creating the world.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as writers, the plot was there. You know, the story was what it was, and you know, we really had to decide how we were going to tell the story and why we were going to tell the story. And immediately we identified the idea of this kind of 3-week structure, that we'd be telling the story of not a person, but rather a moment, and what shifted in that moment, and the kind of various perspectives along that way. What we knew we wanted to make was a film that was not from Hart's point of view, but rather everyone around Hart, and make it as hyper-real as possible. So a lot of my conversations with Matt Bai and Jay Carson, my co-writers, were, you know, tell me more about your experiences working at a newspaper and being on campaigns. Let's fill these worlds with as much real detail as possible. And and really kind of push the audience to kind of make a decision for themselves as far as what they wanted to, what conversations they wanted to follow. And that begins with the opening shot. The opening shot kind of tells you this is what's in store, and kind of educates the audience on how to watch this film. You open this movie and it's 2.5 minutes long, and we start in the van and we're moving around, and you're hearing different conversations, you're meeting different characters, and you don't know who's important yet. And you're already forced to start making decisions about what you want to listen to.
And when you're casting the film, how important is it to be not loyal to history, but to cast people that somewhat resemble, whether it's physical or in terms of inflection, the actual people versus really casting it?
I mean, I cast Bill Burr as a Miami journalist, so clearly I don't care about accent. That's how they talk in Miami. I mean, people know to a certain extent what Gary Hart looks like. Outside of that, I don't think, there's like uber political fans who know who Joe Trippi is and, are excited that, the guy playing him actually kind of resembles him. But for the most part, I look for the best actor. And that's all that's really important to me.
And, in all of your films, and here as well, music is so critical. How do you figure out how to set the scene, how to bring in certain songs that really advance?
This was a unique movie musically for me. We were looking for kind of what the sound of the film would be. And there was this moment where we put this Dave Brubeck track, that first piece, if you remember it, that played over the opening shot, and it's drums and piano and hand clapping, and the movie just came alive when we put that song on. And at that point, that became the sound of the movie, and our composer, Rob Simonson, who's really talented, started doing these jam sessions. They would all revolve around percussion and piano and hand clapping, and we would try these different ideas. It was different than anything I'd ever done for a film, where normally the composer would write, the melodies and scores, and the musical score could come out of that. This was like all-night sessions at Capitol Records. We were going to try this, try that. We recorded various ideas down, just kind of a drummer and a pianist riffing, and that was really exciting.
Has Gary Hart seen the film yet?
He has. I reached out to all the original participants before we made the movie, and I showed the movie to Donna Rice, to Gary Hart and his wife Lee, to their children, to the campaign people, Tom Fiedler. The first person to see the film was actually Donna Rice. Yeah.
How was the response? What did they think?
She was moved by it. You have to remember that when I started telling people, if people would ask me, "Oh, what are you doing next? What's your next film?" And I said, "I'm doing the Gary Hart story." People inevitably reacted the exact same way every time. They would go, "Monkey business." I was like, "Yeah." And then they'd go, "What was her name? What was that blonde's name?" And they would talk about her like she was an object. And they didn't treat her like she was a human being, no matter who I talked to. I thought that was really interesting. And I knew we needed to humanize this person. And when I got to know her, I thought, oh, this is a really intelligent woman who is ambitious and educated, and whose life was just kind of torn from her hands. So that's how we portray her. I mean, as you notice, this is a film that's really frenetic, right? The first half of the movie, the camera's always moving. We're always purposely presenting you with 2 to 3 things to look at, 2 to 3 things to listen to, and then the movie suddenly stops for the first time, and it stops when we finally get to meet Donna. And you have to kind of take whatever preconceptions you thought you were going to have about this film, that it would be about, a party on a boat where you meet a girl, and now you're actually confronted with a real human being. And she's broken and she's crying. And Donna thought that Sarah Paxton, who played her with real decency and real empathy. And that's something that she's been looking for 30 years.
You said in the intro that this is a movie about a moment. It's not a biopic.
Yeah.
And that you've been working on it quite a while. Did you feel any more immediacy based on where we are right now to get this done?
Well, it's funny. We wrote this movie in 2015, and it felt relevant in 2015. It's now become a little too relevant. I could go with less relevance, frankly. But it's interesting, the president, obviously, the election. We were shooting Tully when the election happened. We wrote this movie and we made Tully, and then the election happened during Tully. And of course the Me Too movement came about over the last year as well. So that brought different context to everything that we were talking about. It is kind of furthered the conversation. Why are we making this movie? What are we trying to say? And frankly, what we were always trying to do is make as open a movie as possible so that there was different access points for different audience members. So I'm guessing in the audience time, everyone saw a different movie. Some of you maybe hooked your line to Gary Hart or Hugh Jackman, but many of you probably hooked your line to Mamadou Athie, the actor who played A.J. Parker at the Washington Post, and the kind of the drama that he was going through. And many of you maybe hooked your line to either Donna Rice or Irene Kelly, the young woman on the campaign who, was given the task to bring her home and had to kind of deal with the conflict of what happens, when the person who you've sacrificed your life to kind of get elected president changes in front of your eyes in real time. So in trying to kind of create all these different avenues in for different audience members, knowing that, you're all going to have a different experience. This is hopefully going to create a conversation for you guys. It was fun when I heard you guys backstage right after the credits started rolling. There was a lot of talking, which always makes me happy. That lets me know the movie's working. So that's kind of what changed over the last 2 years as politics here changed. It just kind of made us more aware of how accurate we had to be with every way in.
Let me open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. Way back there, I'll repeat them so everyone hears. Go ahead.
What is he doing now?
What is Gary doing now?
Gary Hart lives at the same address he did in 1987. He and Lee have been married for 60 years, and he's written a dozen books. And he, under the Obama administration, he served as the special envoy to Northern Ireland, but for the most part, he stayed out of politics. He's had a lot to offer. I mean, look, this is a guy who, in '87, was prescient beyond all imagination. This guy in the mid-'80s literally was saying, this country's addicted to oil, that addiction's going to take us into the Middle East, where we are going to face Islamic terrorism, and we will not know how to fight it, because we have a military that only knows how to bomb people. And he was this way about almost everything he spoke about. He met Steve Jobs in 1981 and came back to the Senate and said, the economy of the future is based on computing, and the difference between the people who, the haves and the have-nots, will be people who do and do not know how to use computers. And was kind of pushing for computers in every classroom in the 80s. And in 2000, now famously, went to George Bush and said, we're going to be attacked by planes. You need to be aware of this. This is the kind of sad irony of Hart is a man prescient about everything, could see around every corner, knew everything that was coming, and for whatever reason, could not see what was happening right in front of his face. That the country was saying, your personal life matters now, we need to know.
Over there?
I've heard it said that this is a pivotal point in media political relations. The Gary Hart story. Do you agree with that? Can you comment on that?
Yeah.
Do you agree that this is a pivotal point in media relations?
I think
politics.
Yeah, I think it is. And it can obviously be interpreted in different ways. Look, this is the moment the wall went up between journalists and candidates. Prior to this moment, and that was kind of one of the big surprises to me, candidates and journalists socialized. They knew each other. They spent all this time on the campaign trail together, and they would drink together, and they would, go eat together. And because of that, they knew each other as human beings. And in this moment, it became the job of the press secretary to put a wall up and make sure that nothing like this moment in the alleyway could ever happen again. Every moment is getting manicured. Every moment, every piece, every word that comes out of the campaign will be gone over 10 times. So I think in that moment, suddenly journalists are put into the job of having to kind of become real investigators. And remember, this is also, You have a generation of journalists coming off of Woodward and Bernstein who kind of grew up watching Woodward and Bernstein and suddenly saw their job in a different light as they they see these two journalists who became celebrities who were portrayed by Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, an Academy Award-winning movie. You also have the birth of the satellite truck and the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, and CNN giving satellite phones to their journalists so they can report from anywhere. A current affair goes on television, and because of that, tabloid journalism drives into the lane of political journalism. As Ben Bradley says in the movie, and he really said this, he said this actually to David Frost, he said, that line about not being able to control the narrative anymore, because if TV is covering it, and other newspapers are covering it, I suppose we have to cover it. And if we have to cover it, then we don't even control what we think is relevant anymore. So I think a lot shifted in this moment, and perhaps it was almost an inevitable moment that Gary Hart stepped into.
Right
Do
down
you
there?
think there was anything Gary Hart could have done to save his campaign?
Was
Great
there
question.
anything Gary Hart could have done to save his campaign?
It's a great question. And it's funny because so much of the conversation about Gary Hart is about character, right? You know, we can all acknowledge, you know, he was smart and he had big ideas, and the question is like, what does it say about his character? And some will say, well, what it says about his character is that he's a liar or that he's a cheat, you know? And then there's another side of that, which is, what it says about his character is, he is who he is. That he refused to talk about this affair because he really, truly thought it was irrelevant. And we now live in an age when candidates will say anything. They literally will say anything. They will lie about anything. If they said something 2 weeks ago, they're like, oh yeah, no, I didn't say that. They lie about their voting record. They'll lie about anything. So while could Gary Hart have pushed back? Yeah, I mean, Bill Clinton was proof of that. 4 years later, Bill Clinton, you know, walks off a plane and is asked about Jennifer Flowers, and he like just shot right back and said, "Oh, where'd you read that? Did you read that in that same newspaper that says there's Martians walking around on Earth?" No, I don't believe that, and walked right away. You know? Technique developed in that time. I guess this would be my question: is we're living now in a moment in which shame is the key word. If you're someone who experiences shame, then you drop out of the race, right? You walk away from politics. If you're someone who doesn't experience shame, not only do you stay in, but you thrive. So apparently we have a system that favors the shameless.
We certainly do now.
Mm.
Right there.
Was there anything in particular that the main characters wanted you to put on as their point of view?
Oh, interesting. Like the real people.
Yeah.
As the question was, you know, did the real people ask us to put anything in the movie? No, I mean, it's interesting. So I reached out to all of them in advance, and more as a kind of because I thought it was the decent thing to do. And be like, hey, I'm the director. Here's my name. Here's my phone number. If you want to call me, I'm here. If there's anything you want to share that'll, you know, help us with kind of the details. And we try to get just little details right. You know, we've reached out to everyone and gave them these questionnaires that ask questions like, what did you drink at the time? What did you always have in your pocket? What kind of car do you drive? What's your favorite sports team? You know, little things you can populate throughout the movie. I think the one thing that no one wanted the movie to be salacious, but that was never my intent. So that was never going to be a big thing. I mean, certainly, look, Gary Hart and Don Rice, neither of them wanted me to presume what happened on a boat or inside a townhouse. But I didn't either, because I don't know what the hell happened in either place. They've never spoken about it. I mean, that's kind of one of the interesting things about this story. It's two really private people who wound up in a really public moment. And Donna Rice has been offered something like $1 million to tell her story, and she's never taken the money.
Let's do a couple more right down there.
Question, you're talking about accuracy. How much did you access in writing and also in directing and depicting it? What was available in the public domain by way of press and stuff like that, press accounts, that actually was reflected in the movie? For instance, I'm really thinking about the press, you know, when he would have a press account, you know,
Yeah.
or a press meeting, or when the press was camped out at his home. Did you access things that were going on at the time?
So the question is, how much did you use information from what was going on at the time to contribute to the accuracy of what was on screen?
Plenty. I mean, that's kind of one of the wild things about this is there's footage of these moments. So that press conference where he's asked about, whether he's ever committed adultery, that's exactly how it happened. I mean, there's footage of this, and I've watched it. It's uncomfortable to watch. That closing speech he makes at the end, about America getting the leader it will deserve. That's a real event. Happened. That's exactly what he said. There's footage of that. That thing that happened in the ballroom, even in New York. That scene with him and Kevin Pollak getting into it. That's a real event. Footage of it. So we had footage of all these things. We could mimic them. But also Matt Pye, who wrote the book on art, the guy who had, written for New York Times Magazine, had done in-depth interviews with all of these subjects in writing the book, and obviously as a co-writer of the screenplay. And that's kind of the greatest thing. Usually I'm writing a movie that's it's fictional, and I have to kind of make up who these people are and what they like and what they would think. Here I can just always go, hey Matt, what happened there? And he can just tell me. And also my knowledge of American history is not rich. I'm a movie guy. So to be able to ask them all the time, what happened on this thing? And they can just kind of give me the whole story.
Over there.
I have kind of a two-parter question. The question is that if Gary Hart was 30 years in the future from when this happened, do you think he would have done the same thing?
If Gary Hart lived today?
No, if Gary Hart...
If he ran today.
If he ran today.
Right. If Gary Hart was running today.
Right.
For a second, I think you meant in 2000, like 30 years from now. I was really excited about that question. As a species, we're all dead. Philadelphia is in the ocean. Waterworld. That was like Kevin Costner. I was imagining Gary Hart just riding a catamaran.
That is a myth.
Exactly, try that as a myth. If Gary Hart ran today, well, here's the question, I guess, is would a Gary Hart run today? And when we look at the process that we've created, what kind of candidates do we just push out of the process who don't even bother running? And that's what concerns me, is with the kind of celebrification of candidacy, and the more, we're going to just get more. I mean, basically, in the 80s, we had Reagan, we had an actor, and by now we have this guy. So I don't think Gary Hart runs. He didn't want to answer this question at the time. At this point, I mean, he's in his early 80s, he's exceptionally with it and knows everything that's happening in modern politics. He knows he is on Russia and the Middle East and everything that's happening in this country as much as anybody. And I think it drives him crazy that he can't offer what he wants to offer. No, I don't think he would. I don't think he would jump in.
And then the second part of my question was, if the climate was not what it is, how would this movie have turned out differently in your mind?
If the climate today was not what it is, how would this movie have turned out differently?
I don't know. I don't think I would have made the movie. Look, I'm like anyone in this audience. I look around at the world and I wonder how the hell did we get here? And I'm trying to figure that out, just as everyone is. So that's why I make movies. I go into every movie with a question. That is honestly why I direct. I would never trust a movie from a filmmaker who thought they were coming into it with answers. There's nothing more annoying than watching a movie than a director going, well, here's the answer. And I'm here making a movie going, this is what's on my mind. It's on your minds. And I think this is relevant. And when a movie is good, the screen becomes a mirror and it kind of reflects us. And it becomes an opportunity to talk about these things. It gives us a prism through which to have the complicated conversations of the present. And right now, it's really hard to talk about politics. We get into fights. You go on Twitter, it's like you're going to get your head cut off. So it's nice to have a story from 30 years ago that lets us talk about gender politics, lets us talk about that line between our public and private life that can be so tricky to get into.
Although someone is eventually going to make a killer movie about what's going on right
Yeah, tragedy.
now. We're going to go all the way back there.
There's a line early in the film where you say, where Gary Hart says that essentially the importance of the youth vote and that youth are our future. And I know we have a lot of youth here tonight, so I hope that all of them and those who are youth at heart vote November 6th here in Pennsylvania. But there are lots of incredibly great performances from younger actors in this film. From Caitlin Dever, Alex Kropofsky, Mamadou Ati, and who I connected most with the film was Philadelphia area native Molly Ephraim, who I think had such an exquisite character.
Yeah, she's the actress who plays Irene Kelly.
Yeah, and so I wanted to know, you've got a room full of film fans. Youth are our future, as Gary Hart said. Who are the youth in this film that you think we, as film fans, need to keep our eye on? Who did you love working with, and who would you like us to keep our eyes out for?
Oh, great question. That's the exciting thing about making a movie with 20 main characters. You get to cast a lot of actors you want to work with, and there's, on one side of it, I get to work with Alfred Molina. That's a lifelong dream. I get to work with Kevin Pollak, or even Bill Burr. I'm a huge fan of. I get to cast him in a movie. On the other side of that, there's all these young parts to play. Now, Caitlin, I've worked with a couple times now. Caitlin actually sang a song in Tully, and she was in Men, Women, and Children. A lot of these actors have worked for the first time. Alex Kropofsky, who you know him from Girls, or Josh Brenner, you know from Silicon Valley. Tommy Dewey was on my show Casual. But I think the two actual people really seem to be drawn to in the movie are Mamadou Ati, who played AJ Parker, and Molly Ephraim, who played Irene Kelly. There's an interesting kind of dramatic pressure that's put upon those characters, and they serve as kind of interesting vehicles to kind of enter the movie through. But they're both brilliant. They're also all well educated. It's like the smartest cast I've ever worked with. It's 2 Harvard grads, 2 Princeton grads, 1 Yale grad. One guy went to Oxford. It's intimidating. I dropped out.
All right, I'll do one more dead center.
Okay, you didn't include the famous picture of Hart and Rice on the boat.
Yeah.
And I kept expecting it to happen, and my recollection was that when that was made public, that's what made the story really explode. When did that become public?
So the question is about the photo. How many of you guys know what he's talking about when he brings up the photo? Yeah. And this is really a great question, and it comes up often, and it's really indicative of how we remember things and why this story is kind of fascinating. The photo came out after the fact. We all collectively remember it as the photo that took Gary Hart down, but the truth is, it's like the Berenstein Bears. Everyone here know what I'm talking about? It's like that. Gary Hart left the race, and a month later, after he'd already left politics, the photo came out.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely remember it the other way around.
Yeah, we also remember him saying, "Follow me around," and then them following him around, which also didn't happen. The "Follow Me Around" quote, as you saw in the movie, came out the same day as the Miami Herald piece. They were already following him around. So, what does this say? I mean, obviously speaks to tabloid culture. This is a story that started out with a big photo of Gary Hart and a little photo of Donna Rice, and by the end of it, it was a big photo of Donna Rice in a bathing suit and a little photo of Gary Hart. But more importantly, it speaks to kind of who we are. We're curious and we love stories. And we can't help think of things as stories. And this story had all the right things, right? It had a boat, it had a really good-looking gal, and it had a boat with a funny name, and it had this photo. And so that's how we remembered it. And because of that, this candidate, whether you like him or you don't like him, whether you think that he should have been president or you don't think he should have been president, we kind of dismissed him in less than a week. And that's kind of astonishing if you think about it, particularly if you think about the trajectory we've gone on for the last 30 years. I mean, This is a guy who was 10 points ahead of George Bush and 25 points ahead of every Democrat. And how did he become president? With what we know about him and what he knows about the Middle East. We don't go into Kuwait. There's no Iraq War. We don't go into Afghanistan. I mean, a lot changes, perhaps. So it becomes interesting that this is how we remember it. We remember it for these details, these kind of splashy, fun, tabloid details, and we don't stop when we think about, okay, what happened, and what kind of decision did we make, and what kind of decision do we continue to make when we engage with the tabloid story instead of what's underneath it.
All right, how about another round of applause for Jason Reitman?